Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Navigating Net Zero in partnership with Arete Zero Carbon. I'm Sarah Ural, consulting editor at CRN, and I'm delighted to be joined once more by Arete Zero Carbon's managing director, Dr. Stephen Finnegan. Welcome, Steve.
Hi, Sarah. Good morning again.
So today we're diving into the greenhouse gas protocol and why it is significant for the channel and its customers. And I'll go straight into my first question, Steve, with no further ado. Can you explain a bit about the GHG protocol and what it means?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So I think for most people, they're probably aware of what the greenhouse gas protocol is, but just in terms of a very quick 2-minute or 5-minute overview, I'll just give a bit of background to it, really. So the World Resources Institute, WRI, based in Washington in the US, and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, the BCSD. Oh, we've started already with acronyms.
Here we go.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I do apologize.
Bring them on. Come on.
So both of these organizations formed in 1998, and they developed and launched what's now referred to as the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, so the GHGP. Now, the aim of that at the time, this is a couple of NGO businesses that realized that we need to establish some form of standardization, some way to measure and account for greenhouse gas emissions. Now, greenhouse gas emissions is carbon, carbon dioxide, and then the basket of other GHG emissions. So it's all termed GHG. So this forms the foundation for what most companies are using today, which is, again, the GHG protocol. Now, that is split into 3 different scopes. And I'm sure most of the listeners are fully aware of what they are, but very, very briefly. So scope 1 are the direct greenhouse gas emissions created by sources that the company owns or controls. So that would be, in a very simple way, natural gas used for central heating or company cars directly owned by the business. Scope 2 and scope 3 are indirect emissions, so they're not in control or owned by the business. So scope 2 is the indirect purchasing of mostly electricity, but can also account for steam, heat, and cooling as well. So if you generate, let's pick a quick example. If you buy in electricity and you decide to put solar panels on the roof of your estate or your business, and you're able to provide all of the electricity from that solar, then your scope 2 emissions are effectively zero in that simple analogy. Then we move on to the big one, scope 3. And scope 3 is all of the indirect greenhouse gas emissions from upstream and downstream activities within your business, split across 15 different categories, starting with purchased goods and services in category 1, right the way through to investments in category 15. So in a very short couple of minutes, that's essentially what the GHG protocol is. Now, it's not something that's mandated and has any legal binding to it. It was formed, as I mentioned, by NGOs, and it's now become so popular that it is the sort of de facto standard for any corporate business globally that wants to measure and account for its carbon footprint.
Wow. So why should the channel and their customers sort of take note of this legislation?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that question as well, Sarah, is that there is no other guidance out there, really. This is the premier source of standardized methodology to report. It was established, through the WRI and so on in 1998, but it was actually published in 2001, and it's been around since then. Now, given that probably over 90% of a company's greenhouse gas emissions are in the scope 3 category, upstream and downstream supply chains, then everyone needs to use this as a baseline and as a standard. And just to take note, and we've mentioned this in previous calls, Sarah, but if every business globally could achieve net zero in scope 1 and 2, there would be no scope 3. So it's just an important comment to make, really. So, and I firmly believe, and I have done for the last 5 years or more, and it's even more pressing every time we speak and every month that goes by. But every single business, no matter the size or scale or magnitude, will eventually have to account and disclose its scope 1, 2, and 3 impact. And that's why the channel should take note. It already is taking note. I don't think we have to, sort of downplay this. I think people are totally aware of it, and especially across IT, it's got a global reach. Every company is interlinked with another. Finally, greenwashing is prevalent everywhere now. So if companies are just saying, well, we're doing our best, we've got EV charging points and that's it. Well, I'm sorry, but it's no longer good enough. So companies are using the protocol to be transparent, to identify real tangible benefits. And as customers now, we are requiring companies to be transparent and to be open. So that's why I think the channel and customers should definitely take note, and they should be using the GHG protocol.
Can some companies say, well, I'm really small, it doesn't really affect me, and I'm not going to make much difference? I mean, this is more for the bigger companies. Can they use the size as a kind of, a way to avoid it, or is this something that affects them all, regardless of size?
Well, again, it's a yes and no answer to that question, Sarah. From a legal point of view, the answer is that it's only mandated for large enterprise companies. So it does depend upon the size of your business, the turnover, number of employees, and the countries in which you operate in. Let me give you a few quick examples. So if you work in NHS procurement, or you work for any UK government contract, independent of the size of your business, you have to do a carbon footprint and develop a carbon reduction plan in line with something called PPN 0621, public procurement notes that was developed in June 2021, so PPN 0621. So that bit is independent of size. If you are operating in the EU, which most IT companies are linked to or operating through, then obviously CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is active now, is there for large FCA regulated companies at the moment. Next year going into large corporate businesses, and then the following year, 2026, as we discussed previously, will affect every single SME. And we talked about this in session 2. So again, that's sort of a yes and no answer. You don't need to do it now, but you will have to in a couple of years. And the US, really, which, as always, the Securities and Exchange Commission recently said they're not going to look at scope 3. But if you're working in California, for example, we have the Californian Climate Disclosures Accountability Act, which was signed in October of 2023. So companies with revenues over $1 billion now have to disclose scope 1 and 2 by 2026 and scope 3 by 2027. So it all does depend. And I'd like to finish answering that question, Sarah, just on another point. So I worked in the Northwest 10 years ago with a company of 4 employees, and they made extremely tiny thermal sensors just to measure temperature. And they were working for Rolls-Royce. And even a company of that size with 4 employees 10 years ago were looking at scope 1, 2, and 3 because Rolls-Royce asked everyone in their supply chain to take count of carbon, independent of your size. So it's a difficult question to answer, really. So it does depend upon a whole number of different factors. My advice, and your advice, I'm assuming, Sarah, is for companies just to get on with it and do it. Even if it's not mandated now, I will 100% guarantee it will be in the future.
We have a moral responsibility, don't we, as well?
Well, that's an obvious thing as well, isn't it, Sarah, really, is to take account of everything you do upstream and downstream, and measure it no matter how small or how large. Now, companies, it's a cost, of course, for companies, but the GHG protocol is available on Google just to download, and other search engines. So you can just get hold of the protocol yourself, and you can just make a start on this and do the best. You don't need any specialist advice. If you're a tiny micro SME, you can probably make a good start.
Yeah. And you mentioned a few, but what are the future developments that we should be looking out for?
So it's important to note that the GHG protocol, again, launched in 2001, has remained quite static. It was there to help any business of any size, scale, or magnitude. So you could have a tiny bakery with 5 staff through to a multinational global behemoth business, and they both use the protocol. So it's been under revision between November 2022 and March 2023, sorry, it was open for public consultation. And I think last time I looked, over 350 companies, I think it was a lot more than that actually, responded to the public consultation. And in March 2024, so very recently, the survey responses have been published online. So the next stage is that the WRI and the WBCSD are looking at the responses from the public, and they're going to make changes to the protocol. So we've been promised that changes are coming. Now, there's a lot of things that need to change. Things like, how do you set the boundaries, system boundaries? How do you measure how far upstream, how far downstream do you go? How do you account for emissions factors? How do you look at differences between what we call spend-based modeling, which is a method you can use to calculate carbon impact based on how much you've spent, through to what's called supplier-specific methods, which are much more robust methods of calculation. So there's a whole range of different nuances, which we're not going to get into today, but it needs a lot more, and especially for the IT channel, we need sector-specific guidance. The GHG protocol has actually written ICT-specific guidance, which I've been through, of course, but it's good. It's a good step, but we need more. We need companies across the IT space to be given a bit more guidance, and this will really help. Finally, there's been over 21,000 companies that have disclosed to the Carbon Disclosure Project to date, and they've all used the greenhouse gas protocol. So it is the standard, but there are changes afoot. I don't think there'll be anything major or significant, but there are changes that will be made.
Fantastic. And what impact could these changes have? Could they be positive?
Absolutely. I think they will be positive, Sarah. I don't think there'll be anything groundbreaking. I think they'll just tighten up a few areas and give better guidance on how to measure certain aspects. So under each of the different categories, the 15 categories of Scope 3, there's probably 2 or 3 different methods to calculate your carbon footprint. So let's just pick one example briefly. Scope 3, category 1 is purchased goods and services. Now, if you're a company that buys £1 million worth of goods and services, you can use a spend-based method of assessment. So you can say, okay, we spend £1 million on buying goods and services. That can be very quickly turned into a carbon footprint using a specific method. You can then say, well, actually, let's break that £1 million of spend down into, we buy, £1,000 worth of pens, we buy £50,000 worth of laptops, we buy this, we buy that, we buy that. And then we find different emissions factors that can account for the carbon footprint, and that's a supplier-specific method of accounting. Now, when we compare both methods, it could be a 40% difference in the carbon footprint. So things like that need to be fixed. Category 11 in Scope 3 is use of sold products. So that's asking companies to consider the carbon footprint of the use of that product. Let's consider a laptop in use for 6 years, and let's consider the reseller or the distie accounting for carbon in category 11, scope 3. Do they need to account for the use of that laptop for 6 years in different countries around the world? It starts to get complex quite quick. And that's the problem that we have. So the main impact on this will have on the channel is what will happen over the next 2 to 3 years with CSRD, with legislation, with regulation, with supply chain pressures, with companies being asked to disclose and to disclose properly and not use, basic methods to do things. They want more detail. And the biggest problem, as we know, Sarah, is around data. So it's very, very hard for companies to report if they don't have the accurate data. And it's great to see recently, the vendors taking big steps in creating accurate environmental product declarations and life cycle assessments of their products so that others across the channel can do that. So we do need that accuracy in reporting. AI will have a big role to play in this. So will we see in the next 3 to 5 years, these huge data lakes of information that AI can just scrape and we have all the data available? Yeah, we will. I think we'll see all of that. And then just to finish, to answer that question, and taking the conversation on a bit of a tangent, but only last month, the Supreme Court has refused planning for oil extraction with Surrey County Council because they haven't considered scope 3. So that's the first time, it's a bit of a landmark ruling, that the Supreme Court has actually starting to look at scope 3. Now, again, we're not talking about IT here, we're talking about planning applications into different industry, but is that the way it's going to go? Yes. Is that the way we're going to see things happen? And if you don't record scope 3, what impact will it have? And we've discussed it at length previously, and we'll discuss it later on as well, Sarah, but absolutely it's going to have a huge impact on the channel. And if, I'm probably repeating myself over and over again, but you have to measure scope 1, 2, and 3 to get an account of it. And then we can move to how do we reduce it next? So sorry, that was a very long-winded answer to a simple question.
It's good. I mean, it's so much to get your head around. I think, the more information we can get out there, the better.
Yeah.
Can't believe we've come to the end again. Honestly, it just flies, these sessions, but
yeah,
I'm certainly learning a lot every time we speak, and I hope the audience are also learning a lot as well. So just to say to anyone watching, if you've got any questions on any of the topics we've covered so far, do get in touch. We are happy to answer questions. Thanks again, Steve, for your time and expertise. It's always great to talk to you, and we'll be back again in August, where we're going to be talking.
In August, Sarah, I think we're moving on to the scopes. Is that correct? I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the next.
One.
We've touched on it today, but I think, as you say, there's so much to say that it needs a session of its own for sure. So that's what we'll be discussing in August. So I will look forward to that. And thank you very much for watching.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.